Hello and welcome to this presentation about the cybersecurity model, also known as DEFCON 658, which has been mandated for all new contracts since April 2017. My name is Phil Blunden. I joined the Defence Cyber Protection Partnership in late 2017 and have been in the Ministry of Defence for nearly 20 years. This is not intended to be a technical presentation. I'd like to start with a simple agenda. Why are we doing this? Who is the Defence Cyber Protection Partnership, and what is the cybersecurity model? Usually in my face-to-face presentations, I like to talk about what's around the corner, but for obvious reasons, I will cover that in a separate presentation. Why are we doing this? Unfortunately, there are bad people out there doing bad things. Just using a few examples, the Mandiant APT1 report and CrowdStrike's Panda are about hacking groups who would steal commercial intellectual property and pass that information on to other organisations. Both these reports can be read online. In 2015, hackers switched off the power supply in Ukraine. I provided a link to an easy-to-follow BBC video you can watch another time to find out more. Okay, the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre has a particular concern about the supply chain threat. Something I often highlight to industry is that it's not just about protecting intellectual property and guarding their negotiating position. Companies also need to think about what impact a security breach would have on their suppliers and the subsequent impact on customers. Bad cyber events can occur both through external hackers and disgruntled employees. So on to the National Cybersecurity Strategy 2016 to 2021. This was launched by the nation's Chief Financial Officer. That tells you there is top-level buy-in and cross-departmental support. It's there because according to the National Security Strategy, cyber is considered a Tier 1 threat. Putting that in context, it's up there with wars and major natural disasters. 3 key points from the cybersecurity strategy are: we need an in-depth understanding of the cyber risk to our data, we need to apply proportionate protection, and we want all suppliers to defence meeting appropriate cybersecurity standards. On to the who. The Defence Cyber Protection Partnership is not just the Ministry of Defence going it alone. On the exec group, our key government partners are the National Cybersecurity Centre and DCMS. Then we have some of our prime suppliers, including BAE Systems, who actually chair the group. ADIS are there to represent SMEs. Having this level of industry backing is key to getting buy-in from our commercial partners. The DCPP's vision and goals are very much in alignment to those I mentioned earlier from the National Cybersecurity Strategy. This is also a good place to mention another aim of the National Cybersecurity Strategy is to make the UK the safest place to do business online. Now on to the cybersecurity model. First off though, I need to highlight a few key documents. With the exception of the DIN, these are all accessible from our gov.uk webpage. The link here will take you to that page. So on to Defence Condition 658 and just highlighting some key parts from that. Firstly, the authority shall determine the risk level. Secondly, suppliers need to complete the supplier assurance questionnaire annually. Thirdly, the Defence Standard 05138 details the cybersecurity model. And finally, contractors are required to keep records and report incidents. The Ministry of Defence retains the right to audit this. On to Defence Standard 05138. This details the cybersecurity model, and in Annex A you will find the cyber risk profiles and the associated cybersecurity controls we expect for each one. The flow down was introduced in October 2017. Basically, it means this applies to the entire supply chain, not just the Tier 1 suppliers. We have a DIN. There's also an industry security notice that can be shared with our commercial suppliers. The cybersecurity model activity is done through our online tool. We call it Octavian, but there are rules which say it has to have a more meaningful name, so we've come up with the delightful supplier cyber protection. These two are effectively the same tool. In the DIN, the defence condition and the defence standard, there is a summary of what we call mod identifiable information, which I'll cover on the next slide. Okay, the cybersecurity model is about how we want suppliers to protect what we call mod identifiable information. How companies choose to look after their own information is up to them, and the nicest way, we don't really care. This slide is taken from the annex on the mod identifiable information that's found in the DEF CON on the DEF stand. Simply put, mod identifiable information, or mod II, the stuff on the left is mod intellectual property. The stuff on the right is the stuff we're not really interested in for the purpose of the cybersecurity model, and I will summarize it by calling it things you can Google. So a quick non-technical analogy of the cybersecurity model. If I lend you a £1 coin, I don't really care how you look after it. I don't expect the same coin back, and it might be returned as two 50p coins. If I lend you my bike, my expectation is when you get it home, it goes in the backyard and you lock the gate and the bike. Whereas if you were to leave it on the front lawn, go inside, make a sandwich, or fall asleep in front of the telly, and it then gets stolen, you are being reckless with my bike. If I lend you a bar of gold, doesn't happen every day, but you have to store it in a vault. I would not expect you to keep the bike in the vault or leave the bullion in your backyard. So this process is about understanding the value of what you have and applying a proportionate level of protection. This is the cybersecurity model. On the right hand side, you see I've included the points from the cybersecurity strategy, and I want you to consider them as I talk you through the process. So the first part, understand the risk. The first thing we do, and this is before posting the contract advert, is the project team carry out the cyber risk assessment. This is done using the online tool, and the intention behind this tool is that it's something you can do on a Friday afternoon when everybody else has gone home. So it's not too difficult. On completing the risk assessment, a cyber risk profile is generated. We have the usual suspects, very low, low, moderate and high, and this will determine the level of cyber security we need our suppliers to demonstrate, hence proportionate protection. If the not applicable result is returned, then that says there is no mod identifiable information in the contract and the process stops. Defence Standard 05138 informs us what the cybersecurity requirements are for each of these cyber risk profiles. Before submitting their ITT documents, suppliers demonstrate they meet this requirement by completing the Supplier Assurance Questionnaire, or SAQ. Ideally, they say, yes, we meet the standard. If not, it's not game over. There are alternative options, and ideally they will complete a Cyber Implementation Plan, or SIP, which will ideally state how and when they will meet the requirements. Since introducing Flowdown, suppliers do risk assessments for any elements they are subcontracting. Again, if the result is not applicable, the process stops. Otherwise, their suppliers will need to complete a Supplier Assurance Questionnaire, and so this process carries on down the supply chain until the not applicable result is returned. I've put together this little run through. So the MOD project team have done a risk assessment. It's come out with a result of low, and there's also a unique risk assessment reference. This information is made available to bidders. A Tier 1 supplier wants to bid on this contract, so they complete a Supplier Assurance Questionnaire. That is linked to the MOD risk assessment. They are subcontracting out part of the work, so they do a risk assessment linked to their Supplier Assurance Questionnaire. This time the result is very low. The Tier 2 supplier does a Supplier Assurance Questionnaire linked to the Tier 1 supplier's risk assessment. When they do their risk assessment, the result is not applicable, so the process stops. Some key points on the risk assessment. As I said, it was put together with the intention of being able to do on a Friday afternoon. MOD staff registering to use the tool for the first time must use the DUNS number 227103777. Logging in also requires two-factor authentication. If you don't have access to your mobile, you will need to contact the help desk. You can preview the questions online, go to our website and download the Risk Assessment Workflow PDF document. Before doing the assessment, you'll be informed of the information you need to hand, and you can do trial runs using the online tool. If the result comes out differently to what you think it should be, do let us know. Be aware the risk assessment question set and cyber risk profile results are currently under review. The intention is to simplify the risk assessment further. So the basic cybersecurity standard we use is called Cyber Essentials. This was picked because it was something that we should expect from our suppliers as a minimum. It was not chosen because it was a gold standard. Comparing it to food hygiene, if you walk down the high street, it doesn't matter if you stop at Kev's Cafe or the Grand Hotel 19 Michelin star restaurant, you expect the staff there to wash their hands, cook the food properly and not cross-contaminate. And if they don't do these things, probably think twice before you sat at their table. Likewise, if companies fail to do the basic cybersecurity things, we should be thinking very carefully before giving away our data. Cyber Essentials is based on 5 technical control themes, and hopefully you do these things at home. Firewall, antivirus, system updates, and if you have children, probably a means to stop them playing on the computer at 6 o'clock in the morning and prevent them from installing something because their mates think it's cool. It's very much a self-certified approach. The next step is Cyber Essentials Plus, which adds a greater element of third-party scrutiny, so they should do things like penetration testing on site. A business may also be required to consider processes, including when an employee leaves. At what point does HR inform IT that they should no longer have access? This is a very simplistic diagram showing the relationship between the cyber risk profile and required security requirements. Are not applicable, we can only recommend Cyber Essentials as good practice. It's their data, so it's not our business. Very low, we're asking for Cyber Essentials. Low asks for Cyber Essentials Plus and some additional controls, usually policies. Moderate and high have more controls and policies on top of that. Cyber Essentials certification costs £300 plus VAT. The high end, it requires things like 24-hour network monitoring. And one SME reported it was going to cost them £25,000 to meet this requirement. A common question we get asked is Cyber Essentials mandatory? What we're actually looking for is equivalent controls. If a supplier has them, that's great. And in terms of assessing their cybersecurity risk, it's like an advance to go. Job done. It is acceptable for a supplier to not have Cyber Essentials. Imagine, for example, all our European NATO allies have adopted the cybersecurity model, but using their own cybersecurity standard. Nobody wants our suppliers to have to pick up 30 different cybersecurity standards. The key thing is meeting the controls laid out, so a supplier will ideally demonstrate how and when they meet these requirements through the cyber implementation plan. Difference is, this has to be risk assessed. This risk assessment information can be found in the buyer and supplier guide on the website. I'll be looking to update it later in the year. So a company hasn't met the specified standard, and it's worth noting they may instead have a more rigorous standard. So this table tells you who can accept the risk. At the very low and low level risk levels, it typically comes from the project team or the supplier who is doing the subcontracting. At moderate level, risk acceptor is usually done at the major business unit level, and at high it is done by the DAIS accreditor on behalf of the mod CIRO. Don't forget the right hand column where there is a requirement to inform typically the major business unit CIRO, regardless of whether you're MOD or industry. One of the proposed DEFSTAN changes later this year is to include flow up, so contractors doing risk assessments flow that up through the supply chain. Some things to note on the supplier assurance questionnaire. Typically, my message to industry is that this is an open and transparent approach. What we are not doing is saying, tell us what you've got and we'll see if it matches. The cyber risk profiles are published and the respective controls are available to see in the defence standard, which is also published online. The question set is published as a PDF from our website. A supplier is informed of the information they will need to hand at the start of the questionnaire. The answers we're looking for will have an asterisk alongside. At the end of the process, the user is informed of any gaps, and suppliers can do trial runs. And I always recommend this to them rather than wait till the tender is due the next day. At the moment, about half of our risk assessments are coming out very low, a third are low, and moderate and high are making up just 10%. The risk assessment scoring is being reviewed at the moment, and this is likely to put more results into the low and moderate cyber risk profile categories. One of the benefits of putting this information through the Octavian tool is it can start giving us a picture of how the supply chain looks. In commercial terms, we can see the tier 1 supplier, but not the named subcontractors, only that level of risk and whether or not it has been accepted. There is an aspiration to use a supply chain map at an intelligence level where we can say, okay, this company has had a security breach. Who are they linked to? Or we see these companies being hacked by this particular group. So what are they likely targeting? I'm just going to cover off G-Cloud. In the case, this contract has already been set up and we can't apply the DEFCON 658. However, the recommendation is that a cyber risk assessment is still carried out. This will help you understand the risk to your data and decide if G-Cloud is the right approach. Quick summary then of the cybersecurity model. We need to understand the data so we complete the cyber risk assessment. The risk assessment generates the cyber risk profile, and the cyber risk profile requires predetermined controls. Suppliers then demonstrate they can meet the required standard through the SAQ. An additional point, the risk assessment is evaluating mod identifiable information from cradle to grave, not the wording content of the contract document. Although you won't need to do this, it is something to be aware of. A supplier's representative completing a supplier assurance questionnaire from moderate or high cyber risk profile needs to confirm their identity. The old method was they'd end up emailing copies of their personal documents. Now they can do the whole process online using the gov.uk verify process. You may have done this yourselves if you've recently renewed your passport online. So overall summary, why the threat is genuine, bad people do bad things. And the National Cybersecurity Strategy says we need to protect the supply chain. So who? Defence Cyber Protection Partnership is a collaboration between industry and government departments with the aim of protecting the defence supply chain. What is it? Cybersecurity model. Understand what we have, proportionate protection, and use standards. This is not about applying a Fort Knox approach to everything. The standard we're using is Cyber Essential. It is intended to get suppliers doing something to deter most opportune hackers, rather like locking the doors and closing the windows. Just some additional information. You've got a link there to our gov.uk webpage, and that includes links to the Octavian tool, the DEFCON, the DEFSTAN, and risk assessment and supplier assurance questionnaire workflows. We have a LinkedIn group. Appreciate it's not accessible through ModNet, but I will announce changes here, which is a better way of finding out where they are rather than checking our webpage every day. There is also an NCSC cybersecurity information sharing portal, although this is more aimed at industry. Thank you for listening. Any questions, please email them into our group mailbox.